We have tasted the goodness of the Word of God, and yet we often fall away from it, crucifying Jesus anew. Again and again, we tell the story. And again, we find ourselves here in the story. For as often as necessary, let us relive it so that with God's help, we will no longer repeat it.
Gethsemane, all who feel the tempter's power, your Redeemer's conflict see. Watch him with 1 bitter hour. Turn not from his griefs away. Learn from Jesus Christ to pray. Follow to the judgment hall. View the Lord of life arrayed. Oh, the wormwood and the gall. Oh, the pangs his soul sustained. Shun not suffering, shame, or loss. Learn from him to bear the cross.
Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. He said to the disciples, "Stay here while I go and pray over there." When he took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, he began to feel sad and anxious. Then he said to them, "I'm very sad. It's as if I'm dying. Stay here and keep alert with me." Then he went a short distance farther and fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not what I want, but what you want." He came back to the disciples and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you stay alert 1 hour with me? Stay alert and pray so that you won't give in to temptation. The spirit is eager, but the flesh is weak."
I invite you to take a moment and think of someone who's having an extremely difficult time, whether it is pandemic related, COVID, financial, hardship with family and friends, difficulties at work and their living situation. And on the piece of paper you hopefully have with you, I invite you to take a few minutes and write a prayer for that person.
Suddenly, while Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came with a mob carrying swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, legal experts, and elders. His betrayer had given them a sign: "Arrest the man I kiss and take him away under guard." And as soon as he got there, Judas said to Jesus, "Rabbi." Then he kissed him. Then they came and grabbed Jesus and arrested him.
Again and again, we betray one another and we betray God. We confess our part in the fragmentation of the human family, and we lament our brokenness. I invite you to take that sheet of paper that you wrote a prayer on and to rip it up.
I'm here. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside the yard. A servant woman came and said to him, "You were also with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it in front of all of them, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." When he went over to the gate, another woman saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." With a solemn pledge, he denied it again, saying, "I do not know the man." A short time later, those standing there came and said to Peter, "You must be one of them. The way you talk gives you away." Then he cursed and swore, "I do not know the man." At the very moment, the rooster crowed. Peter remembered Jesus' words, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out and cried uncontrollably.
The good that we would do, we do not do. Even when we are not willfully malicious, we fail the human family through our fear and timidity. We neglect to stand up for what is right or come to another's aid when they cry out. Sometimes we just don't want to be bothered with the world's ills. We lament that others suffer when we seek preservation. I invite you to take the prayer that you wrote and to rip it up into even smaller pieces.
At daybreak, the chief priests, with the elders, legal experts, and the whole Sanhedrin, formed a plan. They bound Jesus, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate. Pilate questioned him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied. "That's what you say." The chief priests were accusing him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Aren't you going to answer? What about all these accusations?" But Jesus gave him no more answer, so that Pilate marveled. Pilate wanted to satisfy the crowd, so he released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus whipped, then handed him over to be crucified.
Kennedy Brewer was sentenced to death by the state of Mississippi for a murder he did not commit. Through DNA evidence overturned his conviction, prosecutors intended to retry him, and he remained incarcerated for 5 more years before his release. Habib Warner Abdul served 16 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was exonerated after DNA evidence ruled him out as a suspect. 6 years later, he passed away. In 1983, George Allen Jr. was wrongly convicted of capital murder, rape, sodomy, and first-degree burglary. He served 30 years of a 95-year sentence before being exonerated. He died 3 years later. Again and again, our lips and the laws bear false witness against our neighbors. Holy One, save us from this appetite for injustice and turn our hearts towards truth.
Then Pilate had Jesus taken and whipped. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and dressed him in a purple robe. Over and over they went up to him and said, "Greetings, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face.
I invite you to try and reassemble the papers that you tore up. As our music plays, I also invite you to use the chat and to contemplate wherever you are able to reassemble, to notice the scarring of the paper where it was torn. What feelings are invoked when you see the fragmentations and violence done to something you created with such love and care?
O sacred head now wounded, with grief and shame weighed down, now scornfully surrounded, with thorns thine only crown. O sacred head, what glory, what bliss still now was thine, yet thou despised and glory, my joy. safely in thy hand.
Then Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. The soldiers took Jesus prisoner, carrying his cross by himself. He went out to a place called Skull Place, in Aramaic, Golgotha. That's where they crucified him, and two others with him, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a public notice written and posted on the cross. It read, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Therefore, the Jewish chief priests complained to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews," but this man said, "I am the King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I've written, I've written."
I invite you to share in our chat, who is Jesus to you? What distinction or declaration would you give him on the cross? If you were the one to write above his head, as in what Pilate wrote, the King of the Jews, what would you write there as well?
One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. "Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said to Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise."
The last words of Justine Hall, executed by the state of Texas on November 6, 2019. Yeah, I want to address the Roundtree family and apologize for the pain and suffering I caused. And to the Diaz family, that I've put you through this. It should have never happened. And to my mom and Morella, I love you, and I'm going to miss you. I'm ready. The last words of Arturo Diaz, executed by the state of Texas on September 26, 2013. I hope that this serves as an example for the youngsters. Think about it before you make a bad decision. Let's go, Warden. I'm ready. The last words of George Whitaker III, executed by the state of Texas on November 12, 2008. First off, I'd like to say to Mr. and Mrs. Carrier, I apologize for your pain and suffering. I pray, Lord, please forgive me.
Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.
Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene stood near the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." And he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home.
A pieta is a form of artwork that depicts Mary with Jesus, sometimes as an infant, but more often at his death. So we watch a video of a special pieta being made by the author of our liturgy today, Reverend T.D. Anderson. I invite you to think about and to write in the chat as well who you must receive as your own family, who suffers in silence, and whose pain is ignored or marginalized.
"2020 can be counted by many of us, I think, as one of the worst years of our lives, if not the worst. For me, it just felt like a constant, unending Good Friday experience where you are witness to horror after horror after horror without any apparent end or relief. We had moved to Louisville, Kentucky the year prior, so it hadn't yet been a year for us when the COVID-19 pandemic emerged. And for as much as the pandemic stopped in our lives, it couldn't stop everything. For instance, it couldn't stop this practice of extrajudicial killings of Black people, and Louisville, Kentucky found itself as one of the epicenters of racial unrest in America. And as things were ramping up in the case against the police officers who were involved in the issuing of the not warrant the night Breonna was killed, we were also nearing the anniversary of Emmett Till's murder. And I was just wondering what about that is pertinent. There feels like there's something here. And as a creative, the way I lean into grief is to create through it. And I wanted to create through this. You think back on the events of 1955 and what Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley did and how that catalyzed a movement. It's just unthinkable that we are still wrestling with these very issues that took her son from her. And I just needed to paint through that. And with 2020 feeling like a Good Friday experience, I think of Jesus's words in John's Gospel talking about that day where he says to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And, there's no indication who he's talking about, if he's talking about himself or the beloved disciple. But what would it mean for Mary to look at her son as he's being lynched? Because he was being lynched. What kind of fortitude would that take? Where would you have to go? And so I dove into Mrs. Till Mobley's narrative to see what it took for her. What does it take to witness that horror? And how long will it take for us to pay attention to what it does to her and to other mothers?
It was now about noon, and darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock, while the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out in a loud voice, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I entrust my life." After he said this, he breathed for the last time.
I can't breathe.
That evening, a man named Joseph came. He was a rich man from Arimathea who had become a disciple of Jesus. He came to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate gave him permission to take it. Jesus took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had carved out of the rock. After he rolled a large stone at the door of the tomb, he went away.
Sometimes it causes me to tremble, Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? it causes me to tremble. Were you there when they crucified
Do not look away. Do not rush to redeem this violence. Do not carry on as if nothing is wrong. Grieve this. Mourn this. Sit with this. And if you cannot, sit and mourn with those who mourn. Grieve with those who grieve. Go in peace, understanding that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. Knowing that there is more to the story when God's justice has not yet prevailed. May God's Spirit direct you to create the kind of justice that was denied to Jesus on this day. Amen.
Amen.